Welcome everybody. It's great to see and know that you are out there. I'm David Malkin. I am a chair of the Israel Cancer Research Fund Panel A, one of the scientific panels for ICRF, and it is really my pleasure to welcome you to the fifth webinar on Brilliant Minds, which is a monthly series focusing on the gifted ICRF-supported scientists in Israel who are really at the forefront of cancer research. I'm actually a pediatric oncologist and a cancer researcher at the Hospital for Sick Children in Toronto. And I've been involved with ICRF for almost 30 years now. I was on the panel as a panel reviewer back in the early 90s and have been chair of one of the panels ever since and on the International Science Council. I've also had the pleasure of collaborating and working with many Israeli cancer researchers, including our guest today, who you'll hear a little bit more about later. For those who are perhaps a little less familiar, ICRF is a nonprofit organization. It raises money to support outstanding cancer research in Israel. And since 1975, ICRF has raised $72 million for cancer research and awarded more than 2,500 grants to scientists from all the major research institutes in the country. Currently, this calendar year, we fund about 72 different cancer research projects in Israel, and these really cover the breadth of cancer research as many of us might think of it. So we're going to have a discussion today, which is two parts, introducing shortly an amazing woman and her daughter who will tell you their story, and then we'll hear from a scientist in Israel who focuses on a particular area of research. And this is really meant as a Q&A interactive session. So this month we picked childhood cancer as our focus, and one of the reasons for that is that September is International Childhood Cancer Awareness Month. And really what this means is that over the last many decades, there has been much progress in the field of childhood cancer research, and that has impacted the lives of children with cancer around the world. And really, in a sense, perhaps in the times that we live now, where there's lots of limitations and challenges with the COVID pandemic, one of the things that I think of as a pediatric oncologist is the enormous promise that advances in childhood cancer research have made, and how one can look at those as opportunities to continue to move forward and ultimately overcome the challenge of human cancer. And to start that story, today, it's really my pleasure to introduce Dr. Galit Kleiner, who is the mother of a patient of mine in Toronto. And Galit, welcome. Thank you for joining us today. And perhaps you could tell us a little bit about your story and your daughter Sisi's story for us.
So thank you very much for this privilege to speak today regarding the journey that we've been on with regards to my youngest daughter, Sienna, who's now 8 years old. When she was 3 years old, previously incredibly healthy, really vibrant, vivacious child who was pretty energetic and full of humor and life, started to get increasingly cranky. She had sleeping issues and started getting sinus infections. I kept taking her to doctors and getting antibiotics, and then she seemed to be getting better, but then she wasn't, and then she'd have fevers. And increasingly, I was starting to feel alarmed that there was something really not quite right. This culminated in me actually, I'm a physician myself, and looking up her nose, and I saw something there, and I thought, well, maybe it's mucus, maybe it's a polyp. And I kept going to the pediatrician, becoming that mother who seemed to never be satisfied with the care I was getting, but I was really concerned for my daughter. Ultimately, we scheduled an ENT appointment, and unfortunately, the ENT physician saw her, and she went straight from the outpatient community clinic and directed to Sickkids hospital, where she was admitted for the following 3 weeks. And this is sort of this was beyond shocking to me. This was my child who was healthy. This is in the setting of having had 8 miscarriages and having 2 other significantly medically fragile children. And so Sisi was an unexpected miracle for me at the age of 42 when she was born. And it was inconceivable to me that this child of perfect health was suddenly in the hospital. And obviously, everybody was concerned about cancer, but this was just not something I could even envision as, a word that I could put in the same sentence as my daughter, Sienna. And I was doing all sorts of calculations and bargaining, trying to come up with every possible explanation as to what this could be and how impossible it could be that this would be cancer. And I being a neurologist, knew that this wasn't going to be something good, but as a mother, I just couldn't accept this. And indeed, she had a CT scan that evening, and I couldn't bring myself to actually looking at it. And my now ex-husband had said that really she had a mass that was so large it was invading sort of every orifice. And still somehow I was hoping and wishing that there could be some alternate explanation. Suffice it to say that she was ultimately diagnosed with a rhabdomyosarcoma. It was, I think, as I understood it, quite unusual in how rapidly it grew. I think Sisi coined the term autobiopsy, in that in the course of several hours, the tumor grew so large and came out her nose, and she just wiped her nose and then gave a sample. Everybody was waiting to figure out how to do a biopsy of this, but ultimately that wasn't necessary. And so she was confirmed to have this embryonal subtype of rhabdomyosarcoma, and it was a mass.
I don't want to interrupt you there, except just for our listeners. So rhabdomyosarcoma, what kind of a tumor is that? Where is that?
Okay, so I'm sorry. It's a tumor that is a smooth muscle tumor, and it was skull based for her. So that it was growing from the muscle. I believe, Dr. Malkin, I think you probably know better than I do, of her skull, and it was soft tissue, and it was invading. It was coming out through her nose, but the exact extent of how big the tumor was, I still to this day don't know. But we met Dr. Malkin, and obviously I was terror-stricken. I don't really recall what that conversation was like or what you even said to me. I believe I had a friend who took some notes. Sienna was admitted to the hospital and in fact was in the intensive care unit for part of that time, as the tumor was so large, it was compressing her airway, and she was desaturating at night such that she wasn't able to sustain her oxygenation when she was asleep. And so to describe this as a nightmare would be an understatement. But after 5 days of investigations, the diagnosis was confirmed, and she started her chemotherapy. And true to Sisi, she was consistent. I remember that first night with the chemo, she went half naked down the halls of Sickkids, flying on the IV pole as she was getting her chemo, and that was sort of that was the spirit with which she embraced this. Not to say that it was joyous or fun, but she was remarkably brave. I think it helped that she was 3 and had relatively little understanding of what this was, but she knew she felt bad. And she knew that she wasn't at home and she wasn't having summer fun in the splash pad. But with the incredible medical care that she received at Sickkids, with organizations like High Lifeline and Camp Ooch, and with our supportive family and friends, we managed to somehow get through each day. And within even the first 3-4 weeks of her getting her chemo, I think the tumor shrunk substantially. It was quite responsive to medication. And so she was able to come home, and then started the planning of what would come next. She needed radiation. Her tumor was inoperable, and she needed to undergo radiation. And Dr. Malkin really rallied for us to actually go to Philadelphia and get proton radiation, as in Canada, the only available radiation was photon radiation. And as I understood it, the risk of damage to eloquent cortex would be more significant if we were to get the photon radiation. And so in September of 2015, I think September, yeah, we went for sort of a planning radiation. And then in October, we went to Philadelphia for 2 months until November 2015. And we stayed at the Ronald McDonald House. And every day she went under general anesthesia and didn't eat anything until 1 p.m. And then she would also get chemo. And again, you know, when I think back on it, to me, it was horror. To her, she has excellent memories. She recalls that we would, you know, go on fun adventures every afternoon, explore Philadelphia, which is kind of a home base for me, which is where I started my career at the University of Pennsylvania. And so it was a strange experience to be back there on campus and Sisi receiving this care. It was really tough. She was neutropenic. My biggest challenge, and Dr. Malkin and I had long discussions about this, was keeping her nutritionally maintained, because she didn't really want to eat, understandably. And then when she got radiation, we were concerned that the radiation would cause her difficulties with swallowing. And so there was contemplation of a feeding tube, which I knew my daughter and I knew she wouldn't tolerate well. And so it was basically my job that year to ensure, you know, every calorie went in. And I still have the calorie count notes that I kept on my phone. And, you know, I was ecstatic when she'd have 3 potato chips and a sip of apple juice. And those those afternoons in Philadelphia, when we went on the, you know, merry-go-round and all the various adventures, I always would get her a burger and shove as much ice cream into her as I could. And I just had to get through each day. And somehow, and we had a calendar and we crossed off each day on the calendar. But she made a collection of incredible friends at the Ronald McDonald House that are still her fans to this day.
Right.
And so we got through that, and remarkably, you know, she had, I think, Dr. Malkin, she had a relatively uneventful course of treatment, in that, you know, she didn't have too many additional hospitalizations. There were some fevers. In January, we tried to get her back into some semblance of normality. That whole year, she insisted on wearing pajamas underneath her clothes. And so it was almost a statement. And I asked her about this, and she said, "Mommy, I just didn't feel good. And I felt I wanted to be cozy in bed, and I was scared. And so I felt I'd wear my pajamas and that would help." And, you know, my previously robust, healthy, beautiful child was just a shadow of herself with no hair and looking malnourished. But her spirit was incredible. In fact, before we'd go to chemo every Friday at Sickkids, we would stop at Aroma coffee shop, and I would try and get her to eat a croissant. And despite that she wasn't feeling well, she would always dance around. And at one point, there was some university students who saw her and were quite inspired by her. And they got a kick out of her. She was pretty funny. And they said, you know, we're doing a fundraiser and we're looking for somebody to endorse. So usually we endorse organizations, but we've just met your daughter and she's a remarkable little girl, and we wonder if we can do a fundraiser in her honor. And this was at Ryerson University. And they put together the most beautiful event. And it was, I remember she was in the irinotecan cycle. It was in February of 2016. And it was a Thursday night. She had just gone through her 4th day and she wasn't feeling well. And this event was at 6:00 at night. And she said, "Mommy, I want to go." And she put on her PJs and her dress over top. And we packed up the kids and we went to the to the event. And she said, "I want to sing." And this was, there were 200 people in the audience, and she was 3 years old. And she and a friend of ours, Jesse Seguin, he played the guitar, and she stood up and she sang "Let It Go." And unbeknownst to me, she knew all the words, and she was pretty weak, but she still belted it out, and she got a standing ovation. And I think that's the essence of Sisi. And she always said to me, "Mommy," even when it was over, she said, "You've got to let it go. It's behind us. We have to move on." This is my 3-year-old.
And now, in a sense, she has moved on, right? I mean, now we're 5
now
years
4.5, yeah, 4.5 years later. Yeah, it'll April 22nd, 2021 will be 5 years. And you told me that she's in remission, and then we can only use the word cure at 5 years, but I think we're getting close. And I'm happy to say that she has been thriving. I remember that phone call with the radiation oncologist who told us all the things that could happen and all the things that could go wrong. And I was terrified. Not that we had a choice, but I was terrified. But so far, I know she's in the survivorship program and she'll be monitored for many years, but she continues to receive incredible care, the highest level of support and sort of risk mitigation. And she is a very artistic, creative, delightful grade 3-er who loves life, loves her dog, Charlie, loves her siblings, and amazingly is thriving. And I hope that just continues. And there isn't a day that goes by. Every time I write to Dr. Malkin, I thank him for the gift of her life, because it really is a gift.
Well, I think there's a massive team of people around to make that happen for Sisi, of course, and much of that and that story is to me. I know as a pediatric oncologist, it's to a certain degree my life as well, with kids with cancer and getting them through. And fortunately, Sisi's story has been is inspiring and positive. Unfortunately, there are still a lot of children who don't make it through, and we still have a lot of challenges to face ahead of us. But that's where the research comes in, of course, and that's whether it's in rhabdomyosarcoma or other things as well. So it is, and I think when we think of taking care of people who have cancer, children who have cancer, families who support their children or their loved ones with cancer, it really is, to coin that old term, it takes a village. And one of the things that we find in this profession is the ability to work very closely together to reach that common goal. And I think that you've done that so well, and I thank you so much for telling the story. I know that's not always an easy thing to do, but there is a truth to it that needs to be told, and thank you.
Thank you very much for the opportunity, and I certainly hope that Sisi's story inspires other parents to know that there's hope, and that the ICRF continues to do the incredible work that they do to further the science of curing children with cancer.
So I would like to again thank all of you out there, and especially thank Galit for really what I hope you will agree was an inspiring story. It's a mixture of fear with hope, and ultimately hope and success wins out. And with that, I'd like to introduce an amazing friend, colleague in Israel, who will have a little interview today and tell us about his work. So I'm going to introduce Shai Izraeli. Dr. Izraeli is the director of the Rina Zayzoff Pediatric Hematology Oncology Division at Schneider Children's Medical Center in Israel, and as well as the Dora and Gregorio Shapiro Chair of Hematologic Malignancies in the Department of Human and Molecular Genetics, Biochemistry at the Sackler School of Medicine at Tel Aviv University. And we're going to have a discussion now a little bit with Shai of sort of focusing on how he became a scientist, what his research is, and of course, how ICRF has impacted and supported that going forward. So Shai, welcome to the webinar. I think your video might not be on, but I'm not sure.
Yeah, so now it's on. So hello, David. David is both a friend and a hero. Why a hero, I will tell you afterwards. Well, actually, you heard part of his heroism, right, as a physician, treating children like the one that we just heard about. But I'll tell you about his research eventually. But first, you interview me, David, right?
Yes.
Then I'll interview you.
Okay. We only have 20 minutes or so, hopefully I'll be finished with you and you won't have any time. Also, for those, if you have questions you want to ask as we're going along, please do that. In the last 5 or 10 minutes, I will definitely try to put as many of those up as possible for Shai. So, Shai, first of all, tell us kind of how did you decide to become a scientist?
Well, scientist, it was easy. This was since the age of 6. But really? So I always knew that I'll be a scientist. But towards the end of high school, after there was a big war in Israel, Yom Kippur War, 1973. So we served in hospitals. I mean, we volunteered. I was a high school student, and then I fell involved also with medicine. So I went to medicine and became one of these rare species like yourself, a physician scientist. But the decision to go to hemato-oncology was, I know, was driven by patients. But a patient like the patient that that we just saw, and because I was actually hesitating between, I wanted a profession in which science is really important, that the lab is very close to the patients, and that you do something. And not surgery, because, my hand. So I had 2 options that I was thinking about: infectious diseases. Well, now it will be boom for infectious diseases, right, with corona, or hematology oncology. And what really drove me to hematology oncology are patients. So, for example, I still remember 1992. And then I was a pediatric resident, and I did rotations through the department of the late Professor Rina Zaitov. Schneider was the really pioneer of pediatric oncology in Israel. And then I saw children, I saw children that came with diseases. And I was about half a year, and they came, and half a year later, most of them died. And I especially remember one patient, a 5-year-old, who I was so impressed by how mature she is. I mean, children mature during this disease. And she had a disease that is called chronic myeloid leukemia. And she died from this disease when I was there. And what is amazing, that's what research does. Today, we cure these patients with a pill each day. And even if we don't cure them, we keep the disease in complete remission. So the disease is not there. They need to take the pill, but the disease is not there. That's amazing.
Yeah. As I recall, some of the very early work in understanding the mechanism that led to the development of that drug was actually done in Israel. And with actually ICRF funding.
Yes, exactly. Yes, both the discoveries of the abnormalities in this disease, and also the first development of drugs, not the final drug, not the drug that was eventually. That's true. Yeah. And I think that also you and me, I think we are around the same age.
I think so.
And so, I mean, it's amazing, right? I mean, we have a lifetime. In our lifetime, we are not that elderly. We don't speak about 100 years. We speak about 30, 40 years of work. When we were students, much less than 50% of children with cancer were cured. Now, it's close to 90%. Now we can really say that our goal is to cure every child with cancer, and especially to overcome the toxicity. The toxicity that you just heard, and much worse toxicity that some of our patients observe.
Yeah, because we talk about over, I think it's about now 70% of adult survivors of childhood cancer will have at least one major organ toxicity as a result of their prior therapy. And there's obviously a big challenge, which I think goes a little bit to the kind of work that you're doing now, your own focused ICRF-funded research. Tell us a little.
Yeah, so maybe I'll tell you, something that we are very, very excited on. So later I'll show you about 2 slides on our kind of vision or the general vision of research as physician scientists. But in general, so I'm mainly a leukemia researcher, and every project in the lab began with a patient. And something that just is coming out in the next 2-3 weeks in a journal called Nature Cancer, focused on a problem that is directly related to what you said. Leukemia quite often spread to the brain, so often. The children, it was impossible to cure children from leukemia. Experiments were done, clinical trials in the 70s. The children were not cured. Why? Because the leukemia came back in the brain. So it became routine to so-called prevent leukemia in the brain. And first, irradiation, very high dose irradiation was given. The result was kids that were cured from leukemia, but we don't have to, people can imagine what happens to a 4-year-old child with developing brain that gets lots of radiation. So this radiation was replaced with chemotherapy, but still lots of problems. So we wanted to ask ourselves, how come leukemia cells survive in the brain? Usually you don't have blood cells in the brain. And what we found out is completely unexpected. What we found out is that cells need fat to survive. Usually, so fat is not only bad, fat is essential actually component of the cell, and usually cells get this component from the surroundings. So in the bone marrow, they get it from the fat cells in the bone. But in the liquid of the brain, there are no fatty acids, there is no fat. So what we found is that these cells learn how to make fat themselves, the backbones of fat, that essential fat for survival of the cell. And then we found out, there are lots of drugs that are being developed now to prevent obesity. And a group of them is being developed to prevent fatty liver. Fat in the liver is a common big problem in adult medicine on obesity, and such drugs completely reverse this leukemia in the brain. So this is far still from application, but that's very exciting. Imagine that we can actually target this vulnerability with something that is completely unexpected, a drug against fat production. So that's very exciting.
It's very exciting, actually, and I think that we learn more and more about this. We see it in a lot of other work, this concept of repurposing drugs that were developed for some totally unrelated reason, and then find out almost sometimes accidentally or otherwise that they're in this case useful for in cancer therapy, or at least in this particular context. So we start talking about precision medicine or precision oncology and using things more precisely than just generally treating everyone the same way. Did you find in developing this work, and just for those out there, Nature Cancer is one of the top, the Nature journals are top. So this is...
That's ICRF supported. And also a project of ICRF cooperating with City of Hope in Los Angeles. So that's another something that is becoming unique to this ICRF, developing cooperations between American or Canadian, North American institutions and research institutions in Israel.
Right, which is fantastic, because this is how research goes forward, right? I mean, it's very hard to do everything nowadays individually. Things are more complex. Some people probably hear my dog in the background. Sorry about that. But the idea really is to be able to work in collaboration with large teams or smaller teams across within the nation, but also across the nation. So where do you see this research going now, and how do you put that in the broader perspective? I think you mentioned you had a couple of slides.
So maybe let me share with you. So how do I move up? Okay, this way. So we are. I said that David, you and me, and some others, many supported by the ICRF in this Clinical Research Development Award, are physician scientists. And it's not simple to be a physician scientist, to be a clinician who treats patients and also to be someone in the lab. But I would say that you and me and our people are like us, are absolutely needed, because we are the one who see patients. And we see patients, and we realize some unsolved problems, unmet needs, and we take these needs, these questions to the lab. Research in the lab can continue for a long time, and not all research in the lab is successful, but eventually some discoveries are made. And then we play a role again, the physician scientist, by translating these discoveries into improving patients' life. And I gave you an example that is still, there is a long way for translation, but let me give you another example from a patient that we recently have, really very exciting story that is somewhat similar to the patient that I told you that inspired me to go into medicine. So this is a child that we had, and everything is with permission of the parents. This is a little baby that we had with, you see this huge tumor, and he didn't respond to anything, he didn't respond to chemotherapy. It's clear that the only way to cure the child, maybe, was by mutilating surgery, terrible surgery, to remove this tumor. And then, the story that I was actually reading a paper on leukemia. And then they wrote about an abnormality that we actually, I forgot to say, we did genomic testing and found this abnormality in the tumor. And a drug that was cured mice with this leukemia. And I remember I was sitting, we were sitting in the radiology theater, looking at the terrible pictures of this tumor, and I was Googling, Dr. Google. And I found out that there is already a clinical trial with this new drug that is given by syrup, oral. And next is, this is just 3 weeks after treatment with this drug in a clinical trial. And this is a couple months later. There is a little bit bulge there, we removed it, and this child is cured. Now it's already 2 years after. This is really a fantastic success. We don't see it every day, but this drug, I must say, was approved already just after this, and is already available, I'm sure, also in Canada as part of the regular health services.
Yeah.
So this is the dream. This is the dream that we all share. Not everything is so fantastic. We have to put, not with people for too much hope, but there is really good reason to hope. I mean, again, if we look back, David, deadly diseases, it's amazing what's happening today. So I'm sure that it's, I'm sure that in 20 or 30 years, we'll get to a situation that almost every child with cancer will be cured. And that's only thanks to research.
So what do you think then the immediate challenges? You mentioned actually that, and I would agree with you, that we're somewhere around 85, 90 maybe % of children with cancer overall are cured, meaning the disease never comes back. And I think that's one of the things, we use the word cure in pediatric oncology because we actually can do it. As you said, not everybody, but there are many scenarios where we do. So 5, 10, 15, 20 years, the tumor, the cancer never returns. But there are still this group of 15% or so where we aren't curing. And so why do you think that might be? And what, in your experience, particularly, I think still even in the leukemia world, what's happening there that looks exciting?
We are. I think there are actually maybe 3 areas of very active, promising research. One is what I just showed, studying genetics. So studying in more detail the genetic abnormalities inside the tumors and developing or applying drugs, repurposing drugs to treat this tumor in a personalized manner. And in parallel, developing, we are already applying this, very sensitive methods to see how patients respond. So we give less therapy, less toxic therapy to a patient who responds well, and bone marrow transplant, for example, which is it's terribly toxic therapy, we give to only patients that don't respond. So that's one issue. The second issue is understanding and attacking the general vulnerabilities of cancer. So for example, this is really unbelievably fantastic what's happening now, the development of immunotherapy. So in immunotherapy, we don't adjust the therapy to the specific cancer cell, but actually we treat we have methodologies to treat in general leukemic cells because of certain markers that they carry on the cells, or in some, more in adults, we need still to develop it for pediatrics, in activating the immune cells of the patients to attack cancer. The example that I gave before, metabolism. We know that the metabolism of cancer is different, and if we can attack this metabolism, we can starve, so to speak, cancer cells, but not the children. That's another way to go. Mm-hmm. And then the third issue is something to do with what you do, David. Is we realize more and more that there are genetic factors, inherited genetic factors, that affect childhood cancer, maybe as much as 10% and maybe even more of children with cancer. And we usually said before, well, we cannot do anything about it. But we actually can do, right? And David, you are one of the leaders, so maybe you can say something about it.
Yeah. Well, I will. I mean, there are these things, and it actually relates to one of the questions that's come up, is that if one knows that somebody is genetically susceptible to developing cancer, then you can put in place surveillance plan protocols and ways to detect the tumors much earlier than when they would normally walk into their doctor's office with symptoms similar to the young baby that you showed, or similar to other scenarios that we more typically see. And so if you can detect the tumors much earlier, then the interventions to treat them and successfully are much less. It may only require surgery rather than chemotherapy, radiation, with all the effects of that. And you're able to get it before it's metastasized or spread around the body. So those are one aspect. And the other is we are starting to work actually with colleagues in Israel, one of whom was actually on one of the ICRF webinars a few weeks ago, Rabbi Straussman and Yuval Dor, who's at University, and others, in thinking of ways that we could actually predict who would develop cancer, not only the type of cancer, but even perhaps the age, approximate age. And so you could be targeting things there. And so it's actually amazing, these collaboration with our Israeli colleagues, to develop ways to do that, and ultimately perhaps even develop agents like you talked about that may prevent the tumors from developing in the first place or spreading. Jerry goes to a question that's popped up actually in here. When these drugs are given, let's say the larotrectinib, the example that you gave, how long does it remain effective in the tumor? Do you need to continue doing this? Like, are they on this drug for life, or are they on the drug for a period of time after which everything is cool?
So that's an excellent question. So and that's why we are incredibly hopeful. We are very excited on progress, but we have also to be realistic. So we And that's why research is so important. So we are not just, we are promising everyone that by magic we'll cure everything, right? So one of the problems of these new drugs, like the one that I showed, this larotrectinib, like the pill that I said that is being taken for the CML, and remember I said either cure or keep the disease, keep them without the disease, but they need to take the pill. So I would say, imagine a car. Imagine a car. And these drugs are quite often the drugs that block the gasoline. So we don't have gasoline. So the car stands. We don't have the disease. But if we take the clamp over the gasoline and gasoline starts flowing again, the car may move. So in other words, if you stop this drug, like Corona, we are still learning, about 50% or so, the disease will come back.
Right.
And therefore, I said also about this child, what the drug allowed us is to then apply the another method, for example, surgery. So the tumor really became smaller, and then you can remove the tumor with surgery. Or maybe you can use a combination of another drug to finally kill the tumor.
Right.
And you mentioned Ravit Straussman. I must say something about this, because that's another development that I forgot to mention, really incredibly exciting. Again, we're in the infectious disease world now with Corona, but the microbiome story is absolutely amazing. So Ravit Straussman, that is also funded, I think, by ICRF, has found now that some cancers are also driven by bacteria inside the cancer cells. And in the leukemia field, they are really very exciting, and we don't really understand this, but it's a phenomenon that was discovered, that you have take mice that are prone to leukemia, you treat them with antibiotics, they get much more leukemia, suggesting that the microbiome protects children from developing of leukemia. So this is really exciting what's going on now.
So we've got quite a lot of questions flowing in here. This is great. You've stimulated lots of discussion. I'm just going to try to address a couple of them here in the last few minutes that we have. But one is with respect to brain tumors that you touched on. So well, at least your context was not with leukemia in the brain, which is different than brain tumors, but we do know that brain tumors are particularly resistant to therapy, and they're one of the most difficult to manage, and the sort of the second most common type of cancer. So what kind of progress are we making here? I think you touched on one was in the concept of immunotherapy, and there's quite a bit of work using that. But sort of where do you think things may be heading there?
So that's the area where I'm mostly optimistic about. So this is a huge, what we call unmet need. This is a huge unmet need. So, there are still in brain cancer, I mean, we are much more active now, but there are some brain tumors, for example, tumors of the brainstem, that are still, the idea is still, like old medicine, old physicians, just compassionate, with nothing to do, maybe radiation, and that's it. But what we are now discovering, because neurosurgery really developed, so we are able, not we, I'm not a neurosurgeon, neurosurgeons are able to do biopsies now of almost every type of brain tumor. And we have now genomics. So first of all, we discovered that brain tumor has so many subtypes, and there are already subtypes of brain tumor can be treated with targeted therapy. But we also discovered that unlike some other tumors, like osteosarcoma or others, many brain tumors do not have too many mutations, like 1 or 2 mutations. So we still need to wait for a breakthrough. But this breakthrough will come. And when it will come, targeting, for example, there are so-called mutations that are called epigenetic mutations. I won't go into it, but you have a tumor in the brain that have only 1 or 2 types of mutation. So all what is needed it's not so simple, but all what it needed is to find a drug that targets this one mutation. And then we get into the situation that we already got into in leukemia and others, that from completely incurable brainstem gliomas, for example, we come to a situation that many of them, not all of them, many of them are curable. So I think that, you know, if I have an advice for a new pediatric oncologist, where to go to, I would say brain tumor, very difficult field. Yeah. Go to brain tumors because there will be a revolution.
So a couple more questions before we close. We have 5 minutes total, and then I think we shut down. But so one of them, these are both very, very important. And one is related to, is a sciencey question, and the other is perhaps less so. The first is, why are the most common tumors of children so rare in adults, and the most common tumors of adults so rare in children?
It's actually easy to answer, and it's based on science. It's not, tumors in children results from accident in development. Actually, development of the fetus. We know now that most tumor, for tumor to develop, you need multiple hits, multiple genetic accidents. But we know that most of the childhood tumors, the first event already occurred during development. Actually, I don't know if who made us, nature, God, whatever, but I'm sure if a NASA scientist would have made us, all of us would have been born from cancer. Mistakes in development. And in adults, it's just the opposite. The wear and tear, it's aging. Cells divide, many divisions over years. Every division, there are mistakes. Mistakes accumulate, and eventually we develop cancer.
Very interesting. And then this is sort of the last question before we close is, and it relates back to the initial story that Galit told us about her journey and Sisi's journey is really how can we effectively support parents and families of children with cancer? It's a big question in a short 2-minute answer.
Well, that's very, that's a difficult question. One thing we should never say to a parent that we understand you. We don't.
Right.
This is a real catastrophe. So fortunately, we can be hopeful today. I always, almost always, actually, only. Except for those, for example, these examples that I gave before, that we know that we cannot cure the child. That they should think that, our goal is not simply to give the child a couple of good lives, etc. Our goal is that your child will become a grandparent. So we are thinking about cure to life. I'm always telling them, that there will be tough times, and every time that there will be tough time, they should think that the cancer has tougher time. It's much harder. It's quite often, sometimes the hardest, for some parents, there are 2 hardest moments during therapy, in addition to the crisis during therapy. One is the day of diagnosis. That's clear, right? And also we tell parents, look, you are our partners. And even if Galit is a doctor, right? He's a physician.
Yeah.
So if Galit was my patient, I would tell her, forget that you're a physician. You don't understand anything. It's okay. Ask us again and again and again until you understand and become our partner. Now, the second time point where it's really very difficult for parents is surprisingly when therapy is finished. So when therapy is finished, the war is finished, right?
Right.
They were in a war mood. And then therapy is finished. Child is very happy. The parents start worrying. And then, I heard it from some parents, that they tell them learn something from their kids. We adults, we live always in the past and the future. Kids live in the present. Parents learn how to enjoy the present and not to worry so much about the future.
Thanks. That is very well said. There are a lot of other questions. I think I may be able to answer them offline through the ICRF office, but Shai, it's always great working with you, talking with you, discussing science, philosophy. We were supposed to see each other face to face back March 6th in Israel, and unfortunately a virus got in the way, but like everything in life, we'll move forward. And one of the important things for everybody, of course, recognizing is COVID will be done at some point. It will be something in our past, but cancer will still be around. And so we have to keep on working towards maintaining and continuing the work that everybody's doing and you're doing to overcome the cancer problem. So I wanted to thank you very much again. I think there's a slide that's going up with the ICRF logo and the link, which people who are here who are watching can see, and both the US and Canadian links are there. And also for those who are interested, the webinar has been recorded and it'll be available on the ICRF website towards the end of the week. So definitely please feel free to go back and look at it. And if you do have questions that come from it, and the ones I'm sorry I wasn't able to answer all of them with Dr. Izraeli, we'll be sure to figure out a way to get those answers to you. Shai, thank you again.
Thank you, and if I may say something last, it's really, I mean, you said it, but I cannot I just have to underscore it. Corona is terrible. It has changed the world, but it will go away. Cancer will not go away. We've made incredible progress. There is, I know there is a huge economic crisis. There is also huge economic crisis in supporting research. It's essential. It's essential for the future of both children and adults for cancer to continue to support research and to continue to support ICRF. I'm in debt to the ICRF and so many of my colleagues. So thank you, David, for actually volunteering to work for the ICRF and make sure that we can get the money that is needed for our research. Thank you.
Thank you, Shai. Lehitraot and Shana Tova.
Shana Tova. Shana Tova.
Okay.